A very good evening. Welcome to Sakshi TV's special immigration talk show with attorney Ms. Saimithra Reddy. I'm Preeti Mulbagal, your host for the show. Today we have with us, as I said, Ms. Saimithra Reddy, the managing attorney and founder of Mitra Law Firm based in Chicago. She studied at the Northeastern University School of Law in Boston and has extensive experience working with immigrants all around the world and with the Indian population, specifically on issues affecting not only the F1 and H1B visa holders, but also the detained by ICE and in immigration court hearings before the immigration judges. Ms. Mitra, welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Today's topic is about the realities of ICE detention and the detention centers themselves. These usually move from a foundational understanding to practical realities, legal rights, and policy implications. So let's first understand the detention basics, ICE detention basics. What authority does US Immigration and Customs Enforcement have to detain individuals under the what laws?
Sure, that's a great place to start. Now, what people should understand about ICE is that it is one of the many entities of the immigration system here in the United States. So, the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, oversees all of the immigration policies, all of the immigration enforcements that happen. ICE is one entity that is under DHS, and this is the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And this entity is completely responsible for making sure people are obeying immigration policies and laws. And if you come here with the visa, that you are not overstaying your visa and you're following all of the rules. So ICE has pretty broad discretion and authority to arrest someone or detain someone if they feel that that person has broken or is currently breaking any sort of immigration laws. ICE can detain someone who is on the streets. They don't really need an arrest warrant. They can stop you even on the road and ask you questions and temporarily detain you. And if they feel or if they have information that you have violated any immigration laws, then they can move you into a more permanent detention facility.
Okay. So, how does ICE detention differ from criminal incarceration?
They're actually not so different. ICE detention centers are very similar to jail. So when ICE detains you, they will initially question you. They will look at all of your documents. If they have some reason to believe that you truly are breaking the law or you are not abiding by your immigration visa status, then they can transfer you to a detention facility, which is very similar to a jail where people who have been arrested for crimes go to. So they will take away your personal belongings, they'll take away your phone, your clothes, any personal belongings, your documents, and they will give you a uniform in which you have to change to, and you are put into a detention facility, which is, again, a very similar concept to jail.
So, who typically ends up in ICE detention? Are they always undocumented individuals?
Not necessarily. I mean, I think a lot of people are under the assumption that you have to be undocumented or enter the country illegally in order for ICE to detain you. However, we are seeing a lot more people who have entered the country legally and have violated either their status or some laws of the United States. They are also being picked up by ICE. So, a very common example is an F1 student who came here legally on an F1 student visa, and they are currently, after graduation, working with valid work authorization. But if they commit any crimes, such as drinking and driving, so if they have a DUI, then based on that arrest, ICE can also detain you and put you in detention.
Okay, so that's one of the reasons for their. So, it seems to be the most common one, doesn't it? For detention, for getting detained.
So you have to have some sort of violation, right? Either you have violated immigration laws or other state-specific laws. So if you have engaged in some sort of violation, then ICE does
Mhm.
have, to some extent, authority to at least stop you, question you, and detain you if they further deem necessary.
And let's talk about the arrests and the intake processes. So, what usually happens during an ICE arrest?
Sure. So we talked a little bit about the authority that ICE has. Now, if you are in a public place, this includes if you're in a courthouse, if you are at a USCIS office for a USCIS interview, if you are in any public place, essentially outside of your own private residence, then an ICE
Mhm.
officer does have authority to ask you questions, ask to look at your documents, and then they can handcuff you and move you into a private facility. Initial stages, they will take you to a temporary location where you cannot be held for more than 48 to 72 hours. During this time, the conditions are a little bit better than a typical detention center. You're placed in a waiting room and you're asked
Mhm.
questions. You can make a phone call. If you have a lawyer, you can ask your lawyer to come there. That is a temporary place. If they have reason to believe that there have been visa or immigration violations, then they will transfer you to the more permanent detention facility. So that is
Okay.
generally what a arrest and detention looks like. Now, it is important
Mhm.
to remember that ICE cannot enter a private residence without showing an official arrest warrant. So they cannot come into your home and arrest you. This only applies to public spaces.
So, in that case, are the individuals entitled to see a warrant before being detained, or is it only specific to private residences?
It's only specifically for private residences because ICE does not have the authority to enter your private property without showing you some sort of search or arrest warrant. In a public space, they actually don't need to have any warrant and they can just stop you and question you.
So,
Yeah.
what rights does a person have at the moment of detention?
In terms of rights, you always have the right to remain silent. You don't necessarily have to answer the questions. In some scenarios, if you really have not done anything wrong, it would be helpful to answer the questions so you do not seem like you are wantedly hiding information or breaking the law. If you've done nothing wrong, you have all of your proper documents, you are legally here, then show the ICE officer your documents, answer the questions, and you will be released. If you give them more reason to suspect that you have committed some sort of violation, then they have more reason to detain you. So you can remain silent if necessary and ask for your attorney to speak on your behalf. You are not guaranteed a right to being represented by an attorney. So ICE will not provide you an attorney. And that's one main difference between criminal courts. If you are arrested for committing some sort of crime, then the government does have to provide you with a public defender who can defend you.
Mhm.
However, for
Mhm.
ICE and immigration violations, you're not guaranteed the right to an attorney. However, if you already
Okay.
have an attorney, or if you want to call your family members so they can quickly reach out to some immigration attorney, then you can ask for that right to just make a phone call and get an attorney on the line. You don't have to also sign any documents that you don't understand. If English is not your first language, you have the right to getting documents or anything translated to your native language.
So, how does ICE determine whether someone will be released, bonded, or held?
That is a great question, and there are various factors ICE uses to determine whether someone should be released or not. Now, it depends on the stage of which the detention is. So, in the initial stage, if you're still in the temporary holding, then they will do a background search of you. They will see if you have ever committed any violations. They'll look at all of your documents. If everything is proper, then they will just release you. It's only after they determine that you have violated some law then they will transfer you to a more permanent detention center. Once you get into that detention center, then there are two ways in which you can potentially be released. You can either go in front of an immigration judge and ask to be released on bond. There are certain individuals who are not eligible for that, and those are mandatory detentions. ICE determines who is subject to mandatory detention and who is not subject. So, someone who would be subject to mandatory detention is someone who has a criminal record, who is considered a public safety threat. Maybe you have many arrests, right? So, if you're considered a dangerous individual or a threat to the people of the US, then you would be subject to mandatory detention. So you can go ask an immigration judge. They may determine that you're eligible for bond and release you on bond, which is very similar to bail in the criminal context. Um, so ICE will look at who you are, whether you have any prior criminal arrests, how long you've been in the United States, any positive factors. They'll look and see if you have any relatives in the US, preferably US citizens or green card holders, who can vouch for you and say, if you release this person, they will stay with me and I'll take care of all of their expenses. I'll make the arrangements necessary for them to go back to their home country. So if you have any family members, relatives, if you have valid employment and the employer is willing to submit some sort of letter asking you to be released, if you have young dependent family members, young children who depend on you, so for family reunification purposes. And another factor is medical conditions. If you are going through any kind of medical treatment, if you have an upcoming surgery, if you have medical reasons for which you need to be released, ICE will take all of these factors into consideration when determining whether or not to
Okay.
release you. Mhm.
So you did speak about how the detention centers are. So what types of facilities are usually used for immigration detention? And are they federally run or they are privately owned
A lot of
or
these
privately
detention
operated
facilities
rather?
Yeah. A lot of these detention facilities are privately owned and operated. They're not actually affiliated with the government. Some of them
Mhm.
are, however, a lot of them are contracted out to private companies who build these detention centers and operate them like jails. So they're not very different from how jails are. A lot of private companies are profiting off of building and having detention
Wow.
centers in the US. Yeah.
That seems to be a lucrative business though, given the scenario currently.
Yeah, definitely. There are actually entire communities that are surrounding ICE detention facilities because there's so much employment that comes when an ICE detention facility is built. So many people are employed there, and a lot of people start
Wow.
moving to that area. Yeah, it's a business.
Wow.
hmm
Lucrative. Can we say that they are similar to the criminal jails? Can we compare them with that?
I would say that, yes, because the reality of someone who is detained in one of these more permanent detention centers is that they don't have access to their personal belongings, they don't have access to their cell phones. There's very limited times in which they can make a call. People outside the detention center, including attorneys, cannot actually directly contact a detainee. So we can only
Wow.
wait for the detainee to call us. So there's limited visiting hours, there's limited hours for when calls can be made. The person inside is the one who has to call. They are put into a uniform, so they can't wear their own clothes. Again,
Mhm.
they are given meals at certain times, and otherwise they have to remain indoors in a locked up area, basically under constant
Mhm.
supervision.
Okay, wow.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you spoke about not having access to the attorneys, but then what are the realities regarding medical care or mental health services for the detainees?
Right. So there are medical facilities within ICE detention centers. And so if you do need urgent medical care, then there is an option to see either a doctor or a nurse or someone who can provide that medical care. How good those resources are, how extensive they are, is very questionable. It's not an entire hospital, it's just a small ward. So if you have to have some sort of major surgery, if you have some sort of very critical condition, a heart attack or anything like that, then they would have to transport you to the nearest hospital. This is more for emergency care, first aid, that kind of resource. As to the mental health resources, not all detention facilities have a therapist or a psychologist. I've heard some do, but most don't have that.
Families or children ever detained together?
In some cases, they are. Mostly, they're separated by gender. So men have a different ward, women have a different ward. If it is a very young child, like a baby or a toddler, then there are cases in which the mother and the child are detained together. Unfortunately, I have
Mhm.
also seen cases where young children are separated from their parents and they're put in the children's section. So, not always families are detained together. Husband and wife are never detained together. It would only be if they're minor children. Mhm.
Is there any specific reason for not detaining husband and wife together? And especially, or is it only when they have children? little children.
So so the husband and wife, it's solely because they're separated by gender in a jail. If you think about it, there's a men's jail and a women's jail, right? All of them are not put together.
Okay, that's
So
better.
in that context, yeah, even the children, there is a separate, I guess, section of the detention center where children are housed together as well. You would have to essentially say, my child is very young, I'm breastfeeding them, they have some sort of dependency, and request the child to be mainly with the mother.
So, who
Yeah.
usually qualifies for a bond and how is a bond determined?
Yeah. So if you are able to go in front of a judge, again, not everyone can go in front of a judge. I don't want to get too technical, but there are a few
Mhm.
people who are allowed to go in front of a judge and few who aren't. So if you can go in front of a judge, you have to essentially make a case either yourself or through an attorney. You have to make a case that one, you don't have any extensive criminal history and you're not a danger to society if you were to be released.
Mhm.
Two, that you are not a flight risk, meaning that if the judge releases you from detention, then there is some guarantee that you will come back for your next court hearing or whatever next procedure it is, right? So that you're not going to just abscond and live in the US illegally. So you'd have to prove these various factors. Again, it really does make a difference when you have a family member or relative who can say that this person will stay with me at this address so that ICE is
Mhm.
confident that when this person is released, they will go to this one address and stay there. They can keep tabs. Sometimes they are released with an ankle monitor or a wrist monitor, so their location is constantly monitored by ICE. And every month you have to go check in with your local ICE office saying, I'm still here, I'm still at this address, and I know I have an upcoming court hearing. I will go next month, right? So those are kind of some of the things that a judge would look into whether or not to release you. You can request the judge directly. If you cannot go in front of a judge, you're not in immigration court proceedings, you can ask a very similar thing to ICE, and you can ask your ICE officer or the ICE supervisor at the detention facility to release you based on these good positive characters. No extensive criminal history, you're not a flight risk, right? You have an address, place that you can go to, you have lawful employment, you have a family here, dependents here. You can make your case by either submitting a request directly to ICE or asking an immigration judge.
So,
Mhm.
how long can someone remain in the detention center while their case is pending?
This is the million-dollar question. Now, some people stay for 30 days, some people stay for 6 months. I've seen in upwards of 8 to 12 months. Now, the key difference here is if you are requesting to obtain some sort of immigration benefit, for example, asylum, right? If you are detained by ICE and you are saying that you want to apply for asylum and stay in the United States, then it becomes a longer process because an immigration judge has to hear your case. They have to make a decision. They have to give you some time to be able to put together your case. So that can be a longer process. You might be detained until you get your day in court before you can go in front of an immigration judge and make your case for asylum. Say that you don't want to ask for any immigration benefit. You have no case that you want to fight. You're just asking, I just want to go back to my home country. It's something called voluntary departure. You're voluntarily saying that I want to depart the US and go back to my home country. In those cases, the detention period is shorter because there's nothing you're asking for. You're just saying, please release me or please send me back. Right. So it depends on what it is that you are asking and looking for as well.
So here, listening to this, I have something that came to my mind just now as I hear you.
Mhm.
So what happens if somebody is financially not so sound to get a ticket if after being detained? So does the
Sure.
government help?
Yeah, so actually, when you request for voluntary departure and you say, I don't want to stay here, I just want to go back to my home country, the government will send you back to your home country on the government's expense. They don't actually request or require the detainee to pay for their own flight ticket back home. And actually, in this Trump administration, there's incentive for people to leave because the US government is saying if you voluntarily leave, we will actually pay you, not just the flight expenses, we'll give you $2,000 or $3,000 after you go back to your home country. They're incentivizing people to leave by paying them. So if you don't have money, then you might have to wait a little longer before a flight is available for you to be put on, but that doesn't mean you can't leave. If you have the financial ability, then you can request to speed up your release or deportation by saying, I have my own money, I can buy my own flight ticket, here's the proof of that.
So, what legal options exist for someone who has been detained?
Most important thing is to see if you're eligible for bond so that you can be
Mhm.
released from detention. It is not
Mhm.
an ideal situation to be detained. Like we discussed in depth, detention is very similar to being in
Mhm.
jail. So you don't
Criminal
have the
charges.
freedom. Right, exactly. So being released is the best case scenario. So the first legal route that I would advise anyone to pursue who has been detained, or if your family member has been detained, is figuring out if you can get in front of an immigration judge and request to be released on some sort of bond amount. Say that is not an option and you have to be detained. Then you can work with the ICE officer directly to request some sort of expedited um, outcome in the case. If they want to fight for some sort of immigration benefit like asylum or anything else, then definitely reach out to a lawyer who can help you file that kind of case and present that case in front of the immigration judge. So there's two different legal pathways there. Either try to be released or sent back or fight some sort of immigration case.
And can you give some examples for the challenges that are faced by the detained individuals in preparing their case?
Okay, so when it comes to working with detained individuals, it's extremely difficult, mainly because of the simple fact that people on the outside cannot directly call the person and just talk to them whenever. You have to wait for that person to make a call to you. That really limits the communication. All communication, because it is coming directly from the detention facility, is made through a recorded line, so one has to be extremely careful what is said or anything that is discussed, because everything is recorded by the government, and anything in those phone calls can be used against the detainee in immigration court later on down the road. That poses a significant challenge. There's very limited visiting hours, so if I want to go to a detention facility and set up a meeting with my client to work with them to build the case, then it's very limited in terms of I can only go at a certain window, I can only meet with them for 1 hour. It's very different from a client being able to come into my office and sit with me for 3 hours preparing their case. I think those are the significant challenges in terms of an attorney working with the detained client in preparing their case.
So, how
Mhm.
does detention impact asylum seekers specifically?
What I've noticed with detained clients who are applying for asylum is that they in several cases, I've seen that immigration judges speed up their cases and they schedule their asylum case for hearing very quickly. If you're outside, maybe you have 6 months or 1 year to prepare for your case, to get all of the required documentation, to get documents from your home country regarding why it's dangerous for you to return, all of that. That takes time. Usually, asylum is a very extensive case that you need a lot of time to prepare. However, there are some cases I've personally worked on where a client is detained and then their asylum case is set for a hearing within 30 days. So 30 days is a very short period to be able to coordinate with their family back in their home country, to get the necessary documents, to prepare them for a trial, all of those things. So asylum seekers who are detained have a much more difficult time preparing and being able to properly argue their case.
So,
Mhm.
what role does the immigration court system play in the detention timeline?
Yeah. So immigration courts, in terms of how long a person is detained, it plays a really direct role because how when the judge has availability to hear a person's case determines how long a person is detained for. So if a judge has a hearing slot open in 2 weeks, then the person will be detained for 2 weeks potentially, and then they will get their day in court. They can make their case. If the judge approves the case, then they're released right away. However, if we're dealing with certain jurisdictions or states where there's a lot of people who are detained, a lot of immigrants, the judges are overwhelmed, then the judge might not be able to schedule schedule a hearing until 2, 3 months out. So in that case, the person might be detained for that long. So it directly impacts how long someone is detained.
How have the detention practices evolved under different administrations? You
I
must
think
have
if we look
observed
at
some changes.
yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think if we look in this administration, the Trump administration compared to the last one, um, ICE presence is everywhere. They have increased. The Department of Homeland Security is actually funding ICE and giving more money to ICE so that they can increase their presence, whether it's at airports or USCIS offices or courthouses or just so many public places. So enforcement is becoming a priority in this administration, meaning more detentions, more arrests, more stops by ICE officers, more questioning, and it's generally increasing the fear among the immigrant population right now.
So, what
Mhm.
role does the US Department of Homeland Security play in setting detention policies?
The Department of Homeland Security, like I explained in the beginning, is the entity that is responsible for all of the immigration laws and policies in this country. So they directly create enforcement policies. And it changes from administration to administration. In this administration, they're prioritizing deportation and detention. In other administrations, they might prioritize other things, right? So they can shift the priorities. They can direct ICE officers to make more arrests or make more detentions. I think they play a very direct role. And ICE is a body that operates under the DHS, the Department of Homeland Security. So they have to listen to whatever DHS tells them to do.
So, are there any alternatives to detention currently being used?
I would say no. In terms of if ICE is the one who stops you and asks you questions, if they determine that there has been some immigration violation or you have overstayed your visa, anything like that, then they will detain you. There's no such alternative that I'm seeing besides holding you temporarily and then releasing you. However, if they do determine a violation has occurred, they will put you in a detention center.
So, what
Yeah.
are some common misconceptions about ICE detention?
I think people don't realize the seriousness of it. They don't understand that it is very similar to a jail.
Mm,
I've heard a lot of people just thinking that, oh, they can't detain you for months. They don't have any authority to detain me for weeks or days. They just will stop me, question me, and then if I've done something wrong, they'll just immediately send me back. That is not at all the case. Like I said, people can be and are being detained for 3 to 6 and upwards of 8 to 12 months. So that is a huge thing that people don't understand how similar it is to jail and how long one can be detained there. You are not allowed to take any of your personal belongings. In terms of even something as basic as food, right? A lot of Indians are vegetarians or they don't eat beef or pork. ICE
mhm.
detention facilities actually give a lot of beef and very meat heavy meals. So they will not accommodate your request for vegetarian or vegan meals. So a lot of our Indian clients who are detained are actually really complaining about that and sad about that because they don't have enough food to eat. Hmm.
Wow, that is a
Yeah.
really scary situation because without the
Yeah.
food, and that we're talking about 8 to 10 months, God forbid, it's going to be
Yeah.
a really tough situation there.
Yeah, definitely. So a lot of people get sick or they feel weak, their blood sugar drops, and they're not given the medication or anything immediately. Like I said, the medical facilities are there, but they're very limited. So anything more serious, you need to be taken to a hospital. And some of these detention facilities are in very remote locations. So the nearest hospital could be 1 hour away. Hmm.
Wow. So, are you
Yeah.
allowed to bring your medication if you have any from home?
You would have you would have to request special permission for that. It has to be approved. But the reality is that a lot of people don't go into ICE detention prepared, right? You don't pack your stuff, you're not ready to be
True,
detained. They're picked up on the
true,
streets or just in the most unexpected scenarios. So a lot of people don't have
true.
any of their medication. Some people don't even have their glasses with them. So it takes several weeks before they're even allowed to get glasses to see properly.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, Ms. Mitra, thank you so much. You've given such insightful information and such amazing information that the entire Indian community needs to really be aware of. I hope nobody gets detained. So, and they'll have their information ready with them and they'll do
Yes.
all of their required research, by watching such videos. this is really, really very important for them because there are so many things that I got to know today myself. So it's so important. Thank you so much for your
Yeah.
valuable time.